good evening. I'm Rick Duncan with G1013 Radio.
And I am Dave Snow, formerly Rick's fellow partner in broadcasting, and then fortunate and privileged today to serve as the mayor of this beautiful and historic city. And we are thrilled to be here with you tonight. We want to welcome you to the signature celebration of the Wayne County Historical Museum. First, a little history about this beautiful museum and some of the contributors that have made possible this beautiful campus and the extensive collection within. In 1930, almost 100 years ago, the Wayne County Historical Society accepted the gift of extensive personal collections from Julia Meek Garr and the gift of the Historical Friends Meeting House at 1150 North 8th Street. This beautiful meeting house ground was purchased and 2 adjoining lots were added later.
Right. So through the succeeding years, area residents have also contributed countless heirlooms and memorabilia to help establish an outstanding record of Wayne County's past. And others have given cash donations and bequests and made possible accessory buildings, which include the county's oldest log schoolhouse, built in 1812, and a magnificent 2-story log residence built in 1823.
These replica buildings are essential to this campus. Right behind us is a replica of the original Palladium item printing office. Now, some of you might not know this, but in years past, a long time ago, the Pal Item newspaper and City Hall shared a building. And I can tell you as mayor, it'd be a little odd to have the newspaper right down the front.
Especially considering some of the things you said. You should have heard what I was hearing over here.
So the Wayne County history is particularly significant because this county became a major gateway to the west and at one time was the most populous county in Indiana. When the National Road opened in 1833, countless immigrant families trudged over it on their way west to claim land and begin rooting their families. Since the day this museum opened to the people of Wayne County, it has sparked wonder in children and adults alike with its eclectic collection of local and global relics.
And today, we gather to celebrate a meaningful exhibit to our history and Wayne County's contribution to the landscape of music, not just in Indiana, not just in Wayne County, but throughout America and around the world. We welcome you today, Gennett Records, the birthplace of American recorded music.
This is a story of Wayne County and how it fits into the larger American historical narrative. This exhibit will tell the story of the Gennett family and how they went from building pianos to building the first recording empire that immortalized influential American musicians such as Charlie Patton, Bix Beiderbecke, Louis Armstrong, Gene Autry, and so many more. And as I mentioned those historic musicians, your journey begins tonight on your placemat. You'll find all kinds of information about these influential musicians and how their journey crossed paths with Wayne County, Indiana.
And your placemat is different than the person's placemat next to you. So feel free to make your way around the table and check out all the different things. I mean, not done. We're not done yet, so don't check right now. But you can in a moment. And you know, of all the musicians that Dave just mentioned, not only would they influence countless young people, not only in their day, but also for decades afterwards. They influenced them to pick up instruments, write music, and expand upon that solid foundation to fill homes, concert halls, and gatherings with music. Music that you hear today, bringing you memories of a full color life. From the Rolling Stones to Kenny G to Elvis to Led Zeppelin, these individuals listened to music recorded at Gennett Records and themselves became music icons.
That's right, and we have someone special here today who's done a lot of work on that history. Tom Broyles is with us. Tom, raise your hand.
There
Tom
he is.
of the Firehouse Barbecue and Blues has done a tremendous job of linking that music together. If you stop in the Firehouse Barbecue and Blues, you can see how all that music has connected over time, and Tom has put a lot of work into the Midwest Music Heritage Trail, which is coming to life right now in our downtown as we speak, and he's doing more work on it. So thank you, Tom, for connecting that narrative so everyone can see how the music recorded here influenced so much music that we've come to know and love over the years. The story told through this exhibit isn't just about how these recordings influenced and informed music miles beyond its reach from Richmond, Indiana. It's also the story of how Gennett Records embraced its community and grew into the legacy it is today. From the Gennett Records Walk of Fame in the Whitewater Gorge to murals, festivals, exhibits, and other celebrations, this legacy has created a timeless narrative that can connect people from all over the world, not only to here in Richmond, but connect them to each other.
Now, of all the things we have mentioned, obviously we couldn't do this without the help of a lot of very special guests that are with us, and we want to thank them for being a part of celebrating this impactful exhibit. The Earl Jazz Band.
Give them another round of applause. They did a great job.
Also, the Gennett Family Table.
Big thanks to the Gennett family for your continued contributions and for being here today.
Yes, thank you for being here. It's an honor. Also, the family of Marion McKay, an original Gennett musician.
Big thanks to you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for coming. The work of Museum Director Karen Schenk Chapman and the staff of the Wayne County Historical Museum. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. We have a special someone who had a hand in this exhibit that is not able to be with us today. Karen's father, Steve Schenk, was an integral part of some of the intricacies of this exhibit. Steve worked for WKBV Radio for a nearly staggering 50 years. You don't ever hear of anybody working anywhere 50 years.
10 years. Try 10 years.
Even 10, right?
50 years.
He would only leave for a short stint to serve his country in Vietnam, and then return to his love of radio, and he never looked back.
And anyone who ever met Steve loved Steve. And he was a local historian, he was a ham radio operator, a lover of coffee. Not good coffee.
No.
Just coffee, just black water. He's a fan of black water.
Yeah, that's the military talking,
You're
right?
absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yep. But within that long and storied career, not only did Steve make so many friends in and around Richmond and Wayne County, but he would break on the airwaves and announce some of the most historic moments of our lives. The explosion in downtown Richmond in 1968.
From that to the moon landing and on and on and on. His work would go on to be recognized and honored by Congress, and his legacy lives on today in the halls of WKBB. We had the privilege of working with Steve for 20 years of that storied career, and it was truly a pleasure to be his fellow broadcasters and to be his friend.
Absolutely. We lost Steve in January of 2021, and although he can't be here with us, there is no doubt he is here in spirit, and he's watching his daughter carry on with the vision that they put together and going to share with all of you.
That's right. So thank you, Steve, for your contribution to this exhibit. Now, after dinner, we are going to welcome speakers that will further educate you and inspire you as you hear more about the impact of Gennett Records. And we hope you'll take a moment to check out the auction that is happening. Your auction bids help to support events and initiatives from the museum that work to connect history to visitors from around Wayne County and beyond.
Right, and tomorrow the exhibit opens to the public. So invite families of all ages, anyone who even has ever listened to music ever, to come out and enjoy it, and activities to highlight the 1920s in Wayne County.
And to help you get them excited, you're going to be hearing some music during dinner. It'll be a mix of historic artists that recorded at the Gennett Recording Studios and some of the contemporary artists that were inspired by those original recordings. So you can take those stories with you and inspire family and friends to come to this exhibit.
Once there was music. When I was growing up here in Richmond, I was fascinated by the ruins in the gorge. I would explore there whenever I had the chance away from parental eyes. And finally one day I asked my dad what the buildings used to be. His eyes lit up and he told me all about the recording studio that used to be there. I remember him taking me down there and pointing out the Parrot building that still stands today. He also pointed out the enormous smokestack and additional manufacturing buildings. I decided right then and there I needed to know more. Dad would always make sure I had the latest news on Gennett, from jazz festivals to legacy merchandise to books. And oh, how I loved and devoured those books. It became one of the many things that bonded us. Dad was on the air at WKBV G101, so he loved the story. We shared information back and forth and visited various sites of interest, this museum included, whenever I would visit him. As I went through college and later grad school, I found myself drawn back to this story repeatedly. There was something about it that connected people from all over to Richmond, my hometown. This was something extraordinary, something to celebrate. There is a unique connection that the Gennett's made for all of us. Through the recordings they produced by the musicians of the time, they influenced future musicians we all love today. The rock, blues, country, and jazz we listen to today were all influenced by artists who recorded at Gennett. I believe everyone can find a connection to this story as I did. The story of the Gennett family is as fascinating as those of the musicians they recorded. Their impact on Richmond is apparent still today, and their vision is truly an inspiration. I became the director here in 2018, and at that moment, I felt everything had come full circle. I finally had the platform to tell this story on the scale that could do it justice. In 2019, I traveled to New Orleans to visit museums and archives that could better help me tell this large-scale story. I realized then, more now than ever before, how impactful and far-reaching the story truly was. We moved through 3 years of planning and research with much help from some of the most amazing people, many of whom are in this room tonight. May we all celebrate the story of the Gennetts and the impact they continue to make on us nearly 100 years later. Dad, this is for you. Please let us welcome our first speaker of the evening, Mr. Todd Gold, producer of the documentary, The Music Makers of Gennett Records.
Bravo, Karen. Well done, all of this. Fantastic, amazing, I love it. It was 100 years ago that the music and the method and the moment all came into alignment. The tempo, the technology, and the times. All were perfect for something spectacular to take the nation and the world by storm, and for one moment, seemingly at least, the myth that was the great American melting pot came to life. White, black, and brown people, Jews, Gentiles, holy rollers, and agnostics, Germans, Poles, Italians, Africans, Russians, those from the Far East, those from the Middle East, Pacific Islanders, Scotch, Irish, and yes, even Native Americans. Undoubtedly egalitarian, uniquely democratic. Finally, we got to hear the heartbeat of what could truly be called American music. Jazz, folk, ethnic, country, gospel, rhythm, and blues. Back in those days, they were called by different names. Hillbilly music, race music, church music, the devil's music. And it all happened right here in Richmond, Indiana. The zeitgeist that was 20th century American culture, the soundtrack to the jazz age, all launched from right here. Richmond, Indiana, the magic in the valley, the music makers of Gennett Records. In 30 years of producing documentary films for PBS and other broadcast TV outlets, I've never seen or heard a more compelling story than this, truly. I just thought this had the makings of a spectacular documentary film that folks just needed to know about. What a notion. When Thomas Edison and others began to imagine that anything that could be heard could then be recorded and preserved, it launched an unprecedented wave of technology that led to the formation of Columbia Records and the Victor Talking Machine Company, engineers and technology experts who were figuring out how to take those sounds and carve them onto wax cylinders and discs and be able to play them over and over and over again, for the first time preserving those sounds forever. And in the heart of the Industrial Revolution, in the heart of the country, in the midst of a boom of big oil, big railroads, and big auto, sitting here along the banks of the Whitewater River, stood Star Piano Company of Richmond, Indiana, a colossus of musical manufacturing. By the turn of the 20th century, Star Piano was churning out one full-size piano in 12 minutes. Think about that. Depending on this model, 1,000 pounds of enormous wooden cabinetry, ornate wood carving design, 88 keys tightly strung and tuned from start to finish, out the door, on the train, ready for shipment in 12 minutes. Make no mistake about it, music production was serious business at the Star Piano Company. There was a national network of stores that sold pianos from coast to coast, with manufacturing magnates and managers who lived on a street known as Millionaires Row in downtown Richmond, with more millionaires per capita than any other city in the greater Midwestern United States. And right after World War I, when the first phonograph players were rolling off the lines in Richmond, a new industry was blossoming, and with it the recordings of many of the sounds of American music. Not just foreign opera sonatas or classical pieces, but real American music, roots music. The echoes of our forefathers, the songs sung on porches and churches and synagogues and in the juke joints. All along country back roads and in the city streets, with music that was being the first to integrate the talents of both black and white musicians simultaneously, a work that reflected the ancient traditions of our Native American mothers and fathers, and yes, a music that exposed the dark side of the Ku Klux Klan. Make no mistake about it, Richmond was a messed up mishmash of musical melodrama. A cacophony of chords, sounds that were both strange and yet sacred. Songs that allowed us to soar to great heights, and harmonies that brought us home. All of these tunes, and I mean all of them, were recorded at the Gennett Recording Laboratory here in Richmond, Indiana. So, what do you think a documentary filmmaker should do? I just had to help share this story, your story, with a broader audience. So I started digging into those dusty archives, and along the way I was helped by musicians from every part of this complex and magical American tapestry. Blues musicians, jazz artists, choir directors, tribal elders, nightclub owners, historians, scholars, librarians, composers, arrangers, musical artists of every imaginable genre of American music and culture. I had the great honor of working alongside many of the folks you see here tonight. Sue King, Bob Jacobson, Tina Conti, Karen Shank Chapman, other local folks who all knew about this gem here in Richmond. I got to talk with amazing gatekeepers and storytellers with whom this chapter of American history just shines through their work. Authors, historians like Rick Kennedy and Charlie Dahan, Elizabeth Searles, wonderful, wonderful storytellers. Linda, Gennett Ermshire, members of the Gennett family who are here, thank you all for allowing me to march through your family history and even tread through Linda's home to go through old albums, which was fantastic. And amazing institutions, the Country Music Hall of Fame, Jazz at Lincoln Center, the Archives of Traditional Music in Indiana University, the Great American Songbook Foundation, the Institute of Jazz Studies, Berea College Archives, the Center for Popular Music at Middle Tennessee State University, the Birthplace of Country Music, Louis Armstrong House Museum, Dockery Farms Plantation, Fisk University Archives, Library of Congress, the Big Spiderbeck Museum, the Indiana Historical Society, the New Orleans Jazz Museum, the Star Gennett Foundation, WCTV right here in Richmond, and the Indiana State Museum. And other places close to this sacred ground, Wayne County Historical Museum, and those hallowed grounds in the gorge where Star Piano and the Gennett Recording Laboratory once stood. Musicians I have spoken to all over the world call this place their Mecca, and I am not exaggerating. My most sincere thanks to each of you, and I mean each and every one of you, for your love of this place, your love of this music, your love of this story, and your willingness to share it with me. And, by extension, with PBS audiences nationwide. It's because of you that the PBS documentary film, The Music Makers of Gennett Records, was produced and distributed 4 years ago. I am a lucky, lucky guy to get to share your story with America. Thank you so much. So, can we try the video? Okay, so let me set this up real quick, and then we'll give this a shot here. Okay, if not, we'll just keep it on. All right. So yeah, all right. So as a quick setup, so the documentary takes viewers down the long, strange road that has recorded American roots music, featuring some of the greatest musical acts in all of history. Those gypsies and artists, musicians, and mythical storytellers who once recorded at Gennett during its heyday in the 1920s and 30s. Jazz legends Louis Armstrong, Joe King Oliver, and that incredible orchestra that burned up the streets of Prohibition-era Chicago. The New Orleans Rhythm Kings and Ferdinand Jelly Roll Morton, who penned some of the first integrated jazz recordings ever. The show includes many of the first country artists to record at Gennett, such as Doc Roberts, Bradley Kincaid, and the legendary singing cowboy Gene Autry. It also includes gospel chords from Thomas A. Dorsey and others, the rough strumming of blues pioneers Charlie Patton and Blind Lemon Jefferson, who would inspire many early leaders in rock, R&B, and hip-hop. The documentary even features a political speech by presidential candidate William Jennings Bryan. And in the segment that we hopefully can see here, we're going to focus on two jazz artists who both hailed from the great Midwest. Two innovators of their craft right at the start of their storied careers. Leon Bix Beiderbecke from Davenport, Iowa, and Hoagy Carmichael from Bloomington, Indiana.
Most fans of early jazz envision a lively club scene in the shadows of the speakeasies in many American cities. Practically no one imagines bucolic Midwestern farm scenes. And yet, at the dawn of the jazz age, two of the biggest acts to explode onto the American music scene were born and raised in the Midwest. Leon Bix Beiderbecke of Davenport, Iowa, and Hoagy Carmichael from Bloomington, Indiana.
Master Leon Bix Beiderbecke of Davenport is the most unusual and most remarkably talented child in music that there is in this city. He has never taken a music lesson, and he does not know one key from another, but he can play in all completeness any selection. Davenport Daily Democrat.
Born March 10, 1903, Leon Bix Beiderbecke was a gifted musical prodigy who, by the age of 6, could outplay his grade school music teacher and improvise notes on the piano. Bix grew up in a home where the classics were celebrated and taught on a daily basis.
He was born to a prosperous German-American family that looked down its nose at anything that was popular. It was a very Victorian classical music kind of home. All that classical music he heard, all that salon piano, wasn't wasted on him either, because one of the things that distinguishes Beiderbecke from all the musicians of that period is that he really understands Debussy and Ravel and the classical composers, and it begins to come out in his music.
Bix Beiderbecke had a piano player sensibility. Then he had a kind of pathos and poetic lyricism that came through in his playing, and a characteristic in his sound.
During the First World War, Bix's older brother Bruni acquired a phonograph player, which he sent home to his baby brother, along with some early jazz records. Young Bix was instantly smitten with these new hot rhythms. He purchased a beat-up second-hand cornet from a local pawn shop and abandoned classical music for jazz, much to his parents' dismay.
Bix Beiderbecke, musicians of his age, will listen to the New Orleans Rhythm Kings, which recorded for Gennett in 1922. And they love that music, and they learn how to play it. Beiderbecke would slow down his recording apparatus so that he could catch every note.
At about the same time that young Beiderbecke was outperforming his teachers, another prodigy was establishing his musical roots in the college town of Bloomington, Indiana. Hoagy Carmichael was born in 1899. His mother Lida played piano for the silent picture shows in town. Like Beiderbecke, Carmichael could listen to sounds and play practically by ear. One story from his early childhood recalls his ability to listen to the chimes at the clock tower at Indiana University and then immediately sit down at the piano in his living room and play the song note for note with no training or practice.
My father was smitten with hot jazz. There's no doubt about that. He was a young kid burning with the residue of hot jazz, and he wanted to be one of those guys who played hot music.
In the summer of 1923, Hoagy and Bix met for the first time at the clubs on the south side of Chicago. One night at Lincoln Gardens, they heard King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band with Louis Armstrong on second trumpet.
This is really an extraordinary picture to imagine these innovators all in the same room at the same time, and the influence they would have on each other, the inspiration that they gave each other, and all the things that they would go on to accomplish.
These guys heard the black musicians and said, that's where I want to devote my energies. That's where I'm taking my art. That's a remarkable thing. It's not just progressive, it's rebellious. It's really taking a stand against the way the whole culture, the whole class system and race system is devised. None of these guys have any problem seeing black musicians as tutors at a time when this would be unheard of. You couldn't even imagine, a black intellectual teaching white kids at Yale or Harvard. That just wasn't happening. But these musicians, they knew where to go.
By 1924, Bix and his band, the Wolverines, were touring the greater Midwestern college circuit. At Indiana University, where Hoagie was studying law, he led a band called Carmichael's Collegians. As well, he booked several groups for dances at area colleges, including Bix's band, which was an instant hit.
When he first heard Bix live, it knocked him over. And it was a clarion call to my father, who thought, that is really special. And that guy is doing stuff that I've never heard before.
Bix and the Wolverines earned their first shot at recording at the Gennett Studios in May 1924. Beiderbecke turned to Carmichael and asked him to write a number for the session, Riverboat Shuffle, a major hit of the jazz age and the first popular recording for both Bix, the performer, and Hoagie, the composer.
If you listen to the solo he played on the Riverboat Shuffle, where he really is completely mastering those slurs, they just warm your soul. You feel like you're hearing something that you've never heard before. And you just wish he would go on and on and on.
He's taking chances. He's really going after something. And I think that really summarizes the spirit of what was going on with these musicians. And I think probably why Bix Beiderbecke and Hoagie Carmichael were soulmates in that way.
It was like a movement of younger people saying, man, we could do something bringing these things together. Bring the American popular song together with jazz. Let's meld these things. And he was on the cutting edge of all of the new things that were being played.
Going to Gennett was, for my father, a landmark moment. I can't imagine anything at that stage of my father's musical life, anything more important.
My job as a TV producer really gives me the passport to so many wonderful places across America where this musical mystery tour takes me. I'm a fortunate guy. I always have a ticket to the show, Ulysses with a press pass. For the Gennett doc alone, I traveled from Chicago to Bristol in the Appalachian Mountains along the Virginia-Tennessee border, from tribal lands near the Grand Canyon to the studios of Los Angeles. I went rolling down the Mississippi River from Davenport, Iowa to New Orleans, and from Beale Street in Memphis out to Bloomington, Indiana, and from Dockery Farms Plantation in the Delta to Nashville, Tennessee, and yes, right back home again here in Richmond, Indiana. As I say, folks, I'm a lucky guy, and I had the opportunity to share this story, your wonderful story, with all of you and with PBS audiences nationwide. Thank you so, so much.
Hi everyone, it's really an honor to be here tonight. I'm Elizabeth Searles, also known as Beth in these parts. And I used to be the project coordinator at the Star Gennett Foundation from 2001 until 2007, and now I work as the archivist at the Institute of Jazz Studies, which is located at Rutgers University in Newark, New Jersey. At Rutgers, we have, at the Institute of Jazz Studies, the Star Piano Company and Gennett Records extant business records. It's the largest collection of business documentation related to the company. And in fact, I found out about the Institute of Jazz Studies, which is actually second to being the project coordinator at the Star Gennett Foundation, my dream job, you know, it was my dream job here. But in any event, I got there and I went to the Institute of Jazz Studies when I worked at the Gennett Foundation, because there's so many recordings by Gennett that weren't jazz that it wasn't necessarily making sense for the Institute of Jazz Studies to have this collection of materials that documented country, blues, gospel, classical music, ethnic record. I mean, you name it. This label recorded everything. It's amazing. So I went and I saw this collection. I thought, well, that's really great. But we didn't end up getting it and bringing it to Richmond. It's still at the Institute of Jazz Studies. And in fact, I brought the ledger from the Richmond recording studio from the collection here. It's in the exhibit. It's on loan from the Institute of Jazz Studies. So please take a look, because it's one of our treasures in New Jersey. And we're really glad to share it with you tonight. But since the video is not working, I'll just tell you a little bit of the story that I shared in the video, because Karen used the word full circle, and that's my word too, because I started at this museum when I was 20 as an intern cataloging Gennett records. I put them into the Past Perfect Museum database, and they're still using these records. Like, when I came and I helped with the exhibit yesterday, and my handwriting was on the sleeves of the records that I was pulling out to put in the exhibit, and I thought, well, this is amazing. You know, it just really made me feel good that Richmond is still investing in this history and continues to invest in this history. It's important. This is internationally significant. Richmond, Indiana, and I know that this community has a lot of problems and there's a lot of challenges. I mean, I'm from here, and it's tough. It was tough when I was here. It's tougher now. But we have to keep this history alive, and I'm so grateful that the Wayne County Historical Museum is hosting this exhibit and bringing this history back to this museum in a way that it hasn't been here in a while. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about something that I'm helping the Gennett Foundation with. I used to work there, now I don't, but I'm volunteering. The Gennett Records Walk of Fame is my baby. I started that when we had the Richmond Jazz Festival down on Main Street. And I'd set up this little booth, and I'd sell our CDs, and I'd pass out brochures, and I'd say, hey, join the Gennett Foundation, it's so great. And one day I was like, I need to get people's attention. So I got these floor tiles from Lowe's, like stick-on vinyl floor tiles. I put a big gold star that I got at Hobby Lobby on them, and I stenciled the names of artists on them myself. And then I made big 2x3 posters of the artist. I put the stars, I put contact paper on them, I stuck them on the sidewalk. I put the posters up, and so when people walked by, they stepped on them, and they were like, oh, who's Charlie Patton? Oh, who's Jelly Roll Morton? And then when we developed the plan to create the Walk of Fame, that was one of the things that made it into the plan. And to see that it's real and it's here and it's beautiful, it's a great public art installation. Granted, it needs some work, and that's what I wanted to tell you about. We are starting a campaign at the Gennett Foundation, I'm helping with it, to raise money to support the revitalization of that art installation, so that when people go to the site where all that music was recorded, they can learn about the artists who are there. They can learn about the country musicians, the gospel musicians, the blues musicians, everybody. Alberta Hunter, Alberta Hunter, you guys need to learn about her. She's amazing. I mean, seriously, the history of the recordings that were made in Richmond, it's just really, I just get so, I'm sorry, I get so overwhelmed by it, because to me, it's incredible that this is in our own backyard. And here we are with the opportunity to celebrate it. So we're going to launch the fundraising campaign July 13th, and we're going to be doing it online. There's a crowdfunding platform that we're planning to use, and there's a $50,000 match available. And every dollar is going to help raise money to make sure that that Walk of Fame tells the story on the site where it happened. So people can come to the museum, and they can see the artifacts, and they can learn the details here, and then they can go to the gorge and they can enjoy a walk in the park and looking at the musicians that recorded there and learning a little bit about that history. So we're going to be coming at you with some more announcements, but I just wanted to give that little plug and just say thank you so much for your continued support of this legacy. Please continue to support it and tell all your friends. It's really great to see that the generations of leadership are changing and still surrounding this really important history in our community. And I know I don't live here anymore, but I still consider Richmond my home. So thank you all, and please keep the support up. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for hanging out. This is cool. I lived in Richmond in the early 80s, and that's when I really got the Gennett bug bad in that period of time. And was fortunate to write the history and fortunate enough to have Indiana University Press allowed me to republish the book several times to correct the mistakes in each edition, which were enormous. There were many. But I really got the bug, and the reason I got the bug in Richmond was simply because of the intimacy of this story. You start with the Star Factory, and the employees walked there. They walked to work, walked home, covered with sawdust on their sweaty arms. You have the Pennsylvania Railroad's, train station, where this station connected musicians from all over the country. They could get off that train and walk 12 minutes and be in the Star Valley to record. You had Fred Wiggins, who ran the studio. He lived over on Southwest A Street. It was a half a mile away. He walked. Harold Suley, when he was dragged out of bed in 1927 to record Hoagie Carmichael, he lived on just the other side of the Whitewater River. I've done the walk. You got there in 8 minutes if you walked. And then, of course, you have the Gennett family themselves. I used to have the pleasure interviewing the family. We'll laugh about Richard Gennett, the irascible Richard Gennett. And he would talk about his father, Fred, who basically ran the division for his father, Henry. And all the women on 21st Street knew what time it was because, Fred operated it by the clock, and he would walk that 21 blocks, took 1.5 miles. So there's an intimacy to the story. It all happened within this very tight proximity. And I bring that up because I want to share about one of the great victories of Gennett Records, because it happened in a very faraway land of New York City. We celebrate this year, 1922, 100 years ago, Gennett whipped Victor Records' butt in the courthouse. And they changed the record industry. So real quick, what are we talking about? I'm going to give you a little story, a little tutorial. So around the turn of the century, there was two forms of how you recorded it. Let me use some little guides here. Here's how you recorded a blank 78 disc. One form was called the Hill and Dale, where you etched into the groove, kind of groovy, moving up and downward. They called it Hill and Dale. Dates back to Thomas Edison. They used it for the cylinder machines. Then around the 1890s comes a new form called lateral groove recording, where you would move that needle back and forth in a zigzag motion across the disc to cut it. And this was something introduced in the 1890s by Berliner. It was patented in 1901, later patented by the Victor Record Company. Well, by 1910, you had two titans that were controlling the record business. You had Victor. That's a Victor record for you people too young not to remember or know. The other company was Columbia. And they were involved in a battle because Victor controlled the patents for lateral groove recording, and the bigger problem was the most popular phonograph was the Victrola, only played lateral groove records. And then you had Columbia that finally had to give up the ghost and said, we're going to go with lateral groove records. Well, the two decided to have a little monopolistic, cozy relationship, since they pretty much owned the business all by themselves. The outliner was Thomas Edison still trying to do those Hill and Dale records, the old-fashioned way. Well, these guys do a little agreement where Columbia would just pay a small amount to Victor for their lateral groove recordings. And this was the state of the business when the Gennett family decided to expand beyond pianos to go into phonographs and records. What happened around 1915, there were a bunch of patents that had expired in the phonograph world of actually playing the records. Victor controlled that lateral groove recording technology with all their patents and all their dangerous lawyers. But there were a number of new players that came in the game in 1950 to do phonographs, including one was the Gennett family. And so in 1915, they introduced the Star phonograph. And in 1916, they opened a small studio in New York and they introduced the Star piano label. Okay, and this was sold in their stores. They had stores all over the United States, piano stores. And so they had an outlet to sell these cool little discs. But it was a loser from the get-go because, number one, it was too closely associated with their pianos. And number two, you couldn't play this on a Victrola. They weren't going to get any sales. So the Gennetts were rolling at that time, business-wise. And they decided to do something very courageous. The first thing they did was they introduced their own nameplate Gennett label. This way they could sell through wholesalers around the country, and it wasn't just tied to their stores. But the bold thing was they also advertised that this record could be played on any phonograph. That was like sticking it to Victor. And they knew it was coming, all right? They knew the dark world was coming. because Victor immediately filed a lawsuit against him for patent infringement. Then they go to the U.S. District Court and they file an injunction to order the judge to suppress all production of Gennett records. They knew it was coming. And so the Gennetts did something very clever. They hired a guy named Drury W. Cooper. He was a very prominent patent attorney in New York, well-connected politically, went to Rutgers. His wife was very involved politically in New York. And they took one of the very best guys out there to help them in this battle against Victor. So even early on, it became pretty apparent that the Gennetts had some strong ground to stand on. For one, the pressure is always on the plaintiff, Victor, to prove this lateral groove technology was their invention, all right? The onus is on them. And the judge is like, well, no, I'm just so sure about this. There are a lot of other early patents. This thing's going to have to go to court, and we're going to allow the Gennetts to keep producing records. Now, Henry Gennett's only about 5'5", 5'6". Kind of, where's Linda? Yeah, kind of where Linda, we all know Linda. About the same. However, he had big shoulders because all these other labels are hanging on Henry, right? Vocalion, Brunswick, OK Records. Because they're all going to be out of business if the Gennetts don't prevail in court. They're going to be done just like the Gennetts. So they're all just kind of hanging on him. Come on, baby, let's do it. So they go into court, and they also had something, you always need a patent case. They had a lot of money. Star Piano was very successful. And they'd just come out of World War I. They were producing, wooden propellers for the early aircraft the U.S. did in Dayton. And it's not, in addition to the phonographs and the pianos. So it takes some serious ching to fight someone like Victor, who had been successful before in the courts, usually by just throwing a bunch of lawsuits at him. The young companies just backed off. This wasn't Henry Gennett. So they have a great trial, 1920, 1921, in the U.S. District of Southern New York. And the judge's name is Judge Learned Hand. And this case goes on for months. The Gennetts bring over experts from Europe. They actually bring film into the courtroom. This thing goes on for months. And this trial is getting very intense. And while it's going on, the Gennetts are doubled down. They're doubling down now. They're producing more records. Others are producing them. It had a world impact. Pathé Records is like the Victor Records of Europe. They're based in Paris. They were Hill and Dale guys from the beginning, just like Edison. Lo and behold, it's no coincidence. In 1921, they go to Lateral Groove Records. The Gennetts were changing the planet when it came to recording technology. In 1921, Judge Learned Hand declares that Victor did not have claims to this concept of lateral groove recording. They said, yeah, you got great tools, you got great technology, you got great processes. You didn't invent it. You didn't invent it. Game's up. And boy, did things change. But the game isn't over. Because now Victor's going to go to a higher court, the U.S. Appellate Court in New York. And now the story goes from real to surreal. The judge in that courtroom was Judge Augustus Hand. He was the cousin of the previous judge in the U.S. District Court. Not only were they cousins, they were friends, and they also, their days at Harvard overlapped. But they're cousins. So, as we remember from Patty Duke. I don't know what the Victor lawyers were thinking. It ain't happening. And so, sure enough, the cousin was not going to overrule his cousin over in the other court, and he declared also that Victor did not have claim to this original concept of lateral groove recording that was introduced in the 1890s. So what happens? There's a case, and they win this. So they've won now in the court with the injunction. They won in U.S. District Court. They won in the appellate court. Game was over. This is April of 1922. And there wasn't a whole lot of news about it, right? But there was a story on page 12 of the Richmondite. It was Fred Gennett. He, working with his lawyers, posts a statement, which is pretty cool. He's 36 years old, and Fred writes, "The history of this case is almost 3 years of intense litigation and embraced in its scope the entire art of record making from its inception to the point whereby this decision restricting patents was broken and the manufacture of records becomes public property." Nailed him. So now, not only when we talk about Gennett influencing, country western and jazz and blues, that's all true. But you have to understand, they also opened the floodgates for everybody else to do the same thing. right? OK Records did amazing jazz music within a couple years of this decision. So they changed the whole industry with this. It was much more important than just the records they made. Now, the business didn't change that much. Victor and Columbia would continue to dominate the market. They just the way they were. They were tough, and they were a tough group to fight. But the actual landscape of the recording industry had changed. And things moved fast from there. Remember, I told you this is an intimate story, so I want to end it very intimately. Because in April 1922, when the appellate court gave the victory to Star Piano and Henry Gennett, it's the same month Henry Gennett became very, very ill. And on June 2nd, 1922, he died in Dayton. Now, it was a summer night just about like tonight, in June, 100 years ago, 1922, and literally but 2 blocks from here, on Main Street where the Star Piano retail store was, and former and present Star Piano employees by the hundreds assembled there and then walked en masse up Main Street to the Gennett Mansion to pay their respects to the great Henry Gennett, who was lying in state. Very intimate story. So then one more thing happens. While this is occurring, just 2 months later, this crazy band of Italian jazz players who were at the Friars Inn Club in Chicago on Wabash Street come down to record on the recommendation of Fred Wiggins, and Fred Gennett agreed to it. And they produced this record by the Friars Society Orchestra, and a revolution was on, and Charlie's going to tell us about it. So Charlie, get up here. Thank you.
Never give a college professor a lectern and a microphone. So I'm going to begin my 85-minute oration. Sit back, relax. But no, thankfully I have a governor against that. I actually wrote out my what I'm going to talk about. But first I need to supplement a universal truth of show business, which is to never follow a kid act or an animal act, with never follow Rick Kennedy. Here is just one way Gennett had a profound impact on popular music and culture. Prior to its entry in the record business, people only heard music made by others, not music that they heard locally. By recording and promoting blues, jazz, country, and gospel, young musicians across the United States finally heard the music made by them, by their families, by their friends, and their neighbors, on the same technology as the best-selling Caruso or Ada Jones side. Gennett validated what they did, and they made it valuable. These records inspired the next generation of artists who now heard that what they did meant something. It gave rise to a platform and created a money-making career infrastructure with radio shows, concert tours, merchandising, and publishing. I'd like to use our time together to share some interesting facts about some of the groundbreaking artists that recorded for Gennett, many of which did so for the first time right here in Richmond, and what they did after their time here. So I went through the list of 35 or so Walk of Fame inductees, and I randomly picked 5. Yes, I randomly picked 5, though we all could easily do this with any of them. So I'll first start with Charlie Patton. He recorded here in 1929 for the first time for that other label. The combination of his recordings being released during the Depression and his untimely death a few years later, he did not set the world on fire. But great recordings never disappear, and new generations find them and emulated them from the next generation of blues artists who learned directly from Patton and from his records and were the building blocks of rock and R&B. Robert Johnson, Muddy Waters, and Howlin' Wolf, to current artists including Jack White and Gary Clark Jr. Do you guys all know the mythology of Robert Johnson? No. Robert Johnson was a blues artist in the 1930s, learned from Charlie Patton, and he sold his soul to the devil. Right? We all know that story. So he sold his soul to the devil because he wanted to be a great artist and he wanted to be famous. But who was he trying to be better than? Charlie Patton. Jack White had spent the last decade championing his legacy to his audience and reissuing these records, and just last year, Patton was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, while folks like Ozzy Osbourne, Jethro Tull, and the New York Dolls, and dozens of others wait outside for their tickets to be punched. The Rock Hall perfectly summed up Patton. Before Jimi Hendrix mastered the guitar, before Chuck Berry pioneered rock and roll, before Robert Johnson strummed a single chord, Charlie Patton did it all. Gene Autry. We all heard of Gene Autry? So I have a question for you, whether you like country music or not. Why do country artists since the 1950s, and even still today, wear cowboy hats? They can thank Gene Autry for making that look cool in the 1930s and changing the image of country music. Because prior to Autry, country artists were depicted as caricatures of farmers, bootleggers, and mountaineers. Autry, through his movies and his records, which all started here, created the cowboy icon in country music who was honest, brave, and moral. So when Merle Haggard, Brad Paisley, Kenny Chesney, George Strait, or Garth Brooks, Donna Stetson, it all began with Gennett recording artist Gene Autry. His Christmas records, including Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, is heard on repeat the moment Halloween ends through the ringing of the new year. Kids in the 1940s and the 1950s hounded their parents each Christmas for Gene Autry branded cap guns to shoot at their little sisters. He was so successful that he owned a Major League Baseball team, it's now the LA Angels, and at his death was one of the 400 richest people in the world, which I'm sure his champion royalties were a major contributor. Oh, and he's the only person to have all 5 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for excellence in recording, radio, film, television, and live theater. He was a quintuple threat. Lonnie Johnson, a name that many of you may not be familiar with, but he was the master of jazz and blues guitar, and he recorded here in Chicago a few times, usually under a pseudonym. I think it was George Jefferson. No relation to the... So there you go, there's one of the great influences. He made George Jefferson a cool name. But 20 years after his time at Gennett, in his late 40s, he scored a #1 R&B and top 20 pop hit, one of the first records to chart in the top 20 pop charts by a black artist, with a song called Tomorrow Night for King Records in Cincinnati. A young high school student in Memphis heard this record, worked up a cover, and recorded it during his 3rd session at Sun Records. I think there's a movie about him opening this weekend starring Tom Hanks. Bradley Kincaid, one of my favorites. Now, do you know how many records you needed to sell to have a hit country record from the 1920s through the 1960s? Anybody want to guess? 7,000. How much? 7,000. 7,000. Well, you went the wrong way. You usually say 1 million. A hit country record is a 5-figure accomplishment until the 1960s. Hit Gennett country size, which there were few, sold between 10 and 20,000 copies through all the labels and pseudonyms. Bradley Kincaid, who first recorded here, who was practically a national star by the time he arrived here as a result of his starring role on WLS's National Barn Dance in Chicago, where the station received over 100,000 letters a year about him. But he never sold above that amount of letters. But he did sell over 400,000 copies of his songbook to his fans and aspiring country performers. Artists like Ernest Tubb, Bill Monroe, the father of bluegrass, Lulu Bell, and Scotty learned their craft from Kincaid's songbooks and records. His songbook sold more copies than even the biggest country stars of the 40s and 50s, such as Roy Acuff, Hank Williams, and Ernest Tubb. Oh yeah, he was probably the first artist to sell branded merchandise, including his popular Bradley Kincaid Hound Dog guitar, which there's one on display here from the Kincaid family, in the Sears catalog. Why he isn't in the Country Hall of Fame is a crime. Louis Armstrong. You heard of him? Now, I could go on and on about Louis, and I did promise you less than an 85-minute presentation. But after making his recording debut with King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band, he went on to having one of the most successful careers in popular music. How successful? Well, some 5 decades after he recorded here, he unseated an upstart young British quartet, the Beatles, on the top of the pop charts. Armstrong made history by becoming the oldest recording artist to attain a #1 pop hit with Hello Dolly at the age of 63. Not only that, he is a member of the Rock Hall, the Grammy Hall, has stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, of course the Gennett Walk of Fame, and many others. He ranks in the top of any poll as one of the most significant, consequential, and influential artists in recorded music history, internationally. Oh yeah, they named an airport after him.
Yes, they did.
No other artist has an airport named after them. And I can go on and on. This is just a small sampling of how many of the artists who recorded at and for Gennett both had success after their time here, and how they influenced generations of popular and vernacular musicians both directly and indirectly. I can make no such claim for the biggest stars on Victor and Columbia prior to Gennett's entry in the record business. Jack White is not reissuing any Collins and Harlan records on vinyl. The Rock Hall is not about to induct Caruso or Al Jolson in its early influencer category like it did Armstrong, Morton, and Patton. Today's teenager is not searching through Spotify to find any Ada Jones or Sophie Tucker sides. Country pickers are not listening to Wes Osman or Len Spencer. They are digging up Doc Roberts and DaCosta Waltz records to learn their craft. Halls of Fame, walks of fame, museums, historic markers, and the like have been erected to celebrate and preserve this work made by these musicians throughout the United States. The music that continues to sell today was first recorded here for the world and many generations to hear and to be an inspiration. So rock on with your bad self, Gennett.
I'm Nathaniel Kraft. I'm the director of the Bix Beiderbecke Museum and World Archives located in Davenport, Iowa, the hometown of Bix Beiderbecke. It's not only an honor to be present here at the exhibit opening, but 2 weeks ago I was asked to talk, so hope this speech doesn't look a little rushed. I'm also very honored to be invited to speak here, and I do personally want to thank the Wayne County Historical Museum for inviting me to this museum to see the exhibit and to also offer my expertise and show Bix's legacy in this exhibit, because Bix does have Gennett to thank for a lot of his career. I'm sure many here could spend hours talking about the history of the many legacies of the people around Gennett and Gennett itself, as I could probably spend a couple hours here talking about Bix and his legacy alone. And so to keep it brief, I'm not going to do that. And I hope the exhibit itself speaks for itself. I'm going to try to add a little bit extra to talk a bit more about Bix than I had planned, just because we didn't get to see the movie. But I wanted to make the talk more personal about the importance of preserving this history and why we have museums and organizations dedicated to the many musicians who helped shape the American music identity here in America and all around the world even. So to show why the story of Gennett Records is important even a century later, and then also to show why it is important that we continue to preserve this history for future generations, even though many of these people are long in past. As the director of a small museum in Davenport, Iowa, one of the favorite parts of my job is giving the tours to guests from all over the world who come directly to Davenport just to see the hometown of Bix Beiderbecke. When they're in Davenport, they come to see his childhood home, his grave site, and the numerous buildings that litter our downtown and the rest of our Quad Cities region that are still standing today when Bix was growing up, he hung out at, he played at, he learned music from. And people come all around just to see that. I like to ask all of my guests when I meet them what the relationship with Bix is, and I've heard many great stories over the last 3 years as director. One of the most common threads begins when they first heard Bix's music while with their family, their friends, their colleagues, and even their music teachers. They oftentimes express these fond memories as significant moments in their lives and cite Bix as an inspiration to them, and sometimes one of their most influential figures that they've ever had in their life. Just recently, a guest I gave a tour to just a few weeks ago came to near tears after finishing his tour with me, because coming to Davenport was one of the most important things that he wanted to do in his life, because for Bix, that was his favorite musician. And his wife actually secretly scheduled the tour, and he didn't realize there was a museum in Davenport. Another recent guest remarked to me at the end how it was fitting that I was able to squeeze him in on a tour over Father's Day this year, because his late father was the one who got him into Bix's music. He knew his father would have loved to be able to see the museum, even though he was long since passed before the museum was even built. Bix died 90 years ago today, or 91 years ago this year, and there's not really anyone around that can say they've seen him live. If they did, they were probably a little child and maybe not remember him. And so the question really asks, why do people still love his music? Why is his music still influential to them? So, however, his legendary sound was preserved, and it was preserved right here in Gennett on recordings almost a century ago. His first recording was in 1924, and his first recording that he wrote himself, his composition Davenport Blues, named after his hometown, recorded in 1925. And we're going to be gladly celebrating that century in 2 years. These were the first glimpse into Bix Beiderbecke's genius as a soloist, who is said to have never played the same solo twice, and it helped propel the Wolverines from gigs across the Midwest into a 2-month-long engagement in New York City at the Cinderella Ballroom. After that, Bix Beiderbecke would go on to play for Gold Cat Orchestra and the Paul Whiteman's King of Jazz Orchestra, before dying at the age of 28 in 1931. Because of these records, Bix Beiderbecke was able to put his music out there, and we're able to see the small glimpses of his genius because of the fact that we only have roughly, I think they say, about 94 confirmed recordings of him. And so out of 94 solos that are not the same, there was hundreds upon hundreds that he played. And we only got those 94, and to this day, everyone cites them as some of the most influential music in their careers. He has inspired people from rock musicians to jazz musicians and anywhere in between. And because of that, we hold a very dear heart here in Davenport with him. In Davenport, we have a festival every year named after him. We have a 7-mile foot race named after him. We have a number of businesses named after him. I hear there's even a pub in Ireland that's named after him. His name is everywhere. We get guests from China, in every country, up to Davenport. So Bix lives everywhere. And this is something that is important to us, especially with an exhibit like this in the hometown of Gennett Records, because our first recording of Bix is here. Ooh. Where was that? Okay, so these records have brought family and friends together, and they've inspired musicians to be innovative in their own music to this day. So without these records, musicians like Bix, who died very young, could have faded into obscurity, being mere legends to people, passing them down to their kids. People will tell us that their grandparents told us about Bix and listen to them play, but they can still hear those stories in this music that they are recorded on records like Gennett Records. So in the age where going viral with sound and video recordings are as accessible as taking out your phone right now and just pressing record, I mean, even this event here is being live streamed just kind of like that. We kind of really take advantage of this early recording technology, and you could say we're spoiled. We don't really think about this history, and we don't really know how hard it was to get some of these early recordings. When people ask me a lot as director, do you have this photo of Bix? Do you know about this recording? Things like that. Have you heard the story? A lot of it tends to be, sorry, there weren't very many pictures of him. Sorry, I don't know. I can't really confirm that date he was there because there's no photos or anything else. There's hearsay. Nowadays, everything's online. And so we really do have to cherish the small things that we do have. And it really did start with things like Gennett, where they were recording these pretty much unknown artists for the most part, and giving them that chance to show them what they could do, and then show the rest of the world what they can do. So without a company like Gennett, and musicians like Vix, who valued the innovation in what they were trying to do, who really knows where we'd be today in both our music and also in just technology in general. And because of Gennett, not only does Bix live, but so do many of the other musicians who have paved the way for music in America. Thank you.
I've been to about a dozen Beiderbecke festivals. They just celebrated their 50th one. And a couple of those buildings are where Bix played. The one with the round roof, that's called the Coliseum. It's got 10,000 square feet of hard maple to dance on, and people were dancing on it. And then the dance land, there was a place on the third floor where the musicians played, and you had to go up all these stairs to get up there. Yeah. And then, of course, on the river, there's a music shell that's right on the river that the musicians played at. Now, today, they have that museum, they have the festival in a casino, air-conditioned casino. So it's not like it was 10 years ago, where you went from venue to venue to venue to listen to the music. And but that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. Yeah, the dance land is like on 3rd Street, and the Coliseum, they call it the Col, C-O-L, down there. And I asked a number of people, what does that stand for? Well, the local people didn't know it was they called it the Coliseum. They've been calling it the Col for 60 years. Yeah, so, and then, the house there is on 16th Street, so it's a mile and a half from the river where he went down and listened to Armstrong play on the riverboat. If you ever get to Davenport, not during the festival, but there is a bed and breakfast, a Beiderbecke bed and breakfast, a huge house that's on the west side of town. That was the grandparents' place. So wonderful, wonderful thing, good story. I'm supposed to talk about the Star Gennett Foundation, some of the early years, and then Tina's going to get up here and finish because she owns the Gennett Mansion and came into town about 2016. The foundation, Elizabeth did a good beginning on that, but before there was the Star Gennett Foundation, and that's been going for 30 years, there was a Star Gennett Preservation Society, and they raised money. Back in 1966, there's a group of people that started SPUR, the Society for the Preservation and Use of Resources. Al Gentry was involved with that, and they were very much interested in the rehabilitation of the gorge, and that's where the factory was. The city and the Chamber of Commerce had committees that helped organize folks in the community, business people, bankers, tourism, that kind of thing, to reclamate the gorge. In 1982, Richmond City Parks took over the gorge. They got acquisition of the land and for a future park. And that was when the initial trail was built from Test Road up to Waterfalls. Now, just a few months ago, the Cardinal Greenway was connected to the Gorge Trail. It took 40 years to do that. I mean, this is how long these operations take. In 1985, the Preservation Group had the first Star Gennett Jazz Festival. And I was not here then. I didn't come till the next year. But I read that the concert featured Al Cobain, Andy Simpkins, Jeff Hamilton, Harold Jones, Carol Lou Woodward, Leo Ryan, and the MC was Mama Jazz, the radio personality from Miami. In 1986, my family moved here to Richmond, and I went to that jazz festival, and it featured Wild Bill Davison, who had recorded for Gennett back in 27, I believe. Officially, the Star Gennett Foundation started in 1991. And so some of that money that was developed, they got incorporated with 501c3, and Elizabeth started 10 years later. And then it really started taking off. They started raising more money, and they had a board that decided they were going to do some interesting things. In 2005, they decided on the Walk of Fame. And in 2006, they established a National Advisory Board, 10, 12 people, including Jones and Hamilton, some educators, Rick Kennedy's on that, Charlie Dahan's on that, to make the selection of the artists to go into the Walk of Fame. 2007 was the first Walk of Fame celebration, and 11 artists went in. Within 2 years, we had 20 artists in the Walk of Fame, and I think there's like 34. They're not all in the walk. Some of them, got a couple of them here. There's a medallion out there in the other room. So 34 have been inducted into the Walk of Fame. Some of the other things that we did in the next 10 years, we had an educational program at Richmond Community Schools where third graders learned about the Gennett history. We also expanded that to Seton and Richmond Friends School. Other things that we had were what we called legacy concerts, where we bring in musicians from out of town, mostly jazz musicians, from New York or New Orleans. And we played at different concerts at, some of you may have attended some of those, Indiana University, Earlham, the Reed Center, Forest Hills had a couple of them out there. So these were paid events and where we brought in wonderful, wonderful musicians. And that gets us up to about 1986, and I want to bring up Tina Conte, who's dressed for the occasion. And please welcome Tina.
Bob introduced me. I'm Tina Conte, and really I'm just a small town girl with a big personality who married someone with really big dreams. And that led us to purchasing the Gennett Mansion in 2016. And at the time when we purchased it, we thought, we're coming back home. We've been gone for almost 20 years. And, it might be fun. You know, our house is 10 years old. It's falling apart. Let's buy one that's 125 years old. It might have better luck. Then Millicent Emery contacted me when she was at the PAL item and said, I was wondering if we could interview you about your purchase of the Gennett Mansion. What did we do? We had no idea about the history of the Gennett family or Star Records or Star Piano, the history that they had here in Richmond. We just thought it would be really cool to own a piece of history. And since then, I've been connected with the Gennett family and with the museum and been able to connect with so many other community leaders and nonprofit people in our community through buying the house and joining the Star Gennett Foundation and just trying to connect to the history and trying to connect with our community and keep some history alive. So I'm just a small pawn in our huge community with all these people who love the history of Gennett Records. So thank you for letting me come up here and speak tonight, and wanted to let you know that, put a little plug in for Star Gennett Foundation. Check out their website for all of their upcoming events that are coming up. They're still doing music at the club at Forest Hills, and they're doing the Walk of Fame Festival later this fall. So a little frazzled with dates, so check it all out online. But thank you so much, and if you want to take a tour of the mansion sometime, just find me on the internet. Thank you.
So that actually is going to conclude the speaker portion of the night. And again, we will get that video to y'all really soon. It will also be available in the exhibit in parts, because it's a really important video, and everybody that participated did such a great job. So thank you all for helping us make that happen. All right, so now is the fun part of the evening. So for my esteemed advisory committee, could you, so we've got Charlie Don and Elizabeth Searles. We've got Rick Kennedy. Sue King had to take off, but we've got something for her. We'll give her tomorrow. Let's see, who else is in the bag? Bob Jacobson.
Roseanne, Elizabeth, Judah, Peter.
Okay. All right. And then, of course, to our Gennett family members that also were wonderful advisors. They worked tirelessly with us and were very patient and answered all of our questions. So thank you all very much. Thank you to Peter Hale, to Mike Gennett, to Linda Jeanette Ermshire for letting me check out your Gennett room. That was one of the coolest days in my life. I wanted to take it all with me. I was very honored to have that privilege. And thank you so much, Roseanne, for coming here and bringing us all of the beautiful material that you did and sending it to us from California. It arrived safely. Check out Roseanne's video in the exhibit out there. She does a beautiful one on the California Gennett mansion. So, yep, there's two, guys. One on each coast, right? So just thank you all for that. But thank you all for coming this evening. We're just so grateful to have you help us celebrate this story that's been a very personal story to myself, but I see how much it's touched so many others as well. And, you know, by you celebrating with us, you're also supporting your museum. Just thank you to all of our speakers this evening. You guys are truly the experts on this story, and we are just so fortunate to have you all share your passion and knowledge with Gennett with us. Thank you to our sponsors, our partners, and our grantors. Your support means so much to us and helps us continue our mission. Thank you, Gennetts, for your story. It has given us endless inspiration, all of you. Thank you. Thank you to my board of directors for all of your support and enthusiasm, and for supporting my enthusiasm as well, which sometimes can be a little extra, as my niece would say. Thank you to my husband, Simon, my family and friends, for allowing me to work so many hours on this labor of love and understanding why I had to. A giant thank you to my staff, my interns, and my volunteers for the countless hours you have put in to help create this exhibit and program. You are the best there is, and wow, am I lucky to work along each one of you. And Dad, thanks for sparking my wonder and encouraging me to tell this story. Have a great night, everyone. Get home safe.